view all aspects of research very interesting to me because it takes on such a personal perspective, because I was homeless as a young person and created a homeless service with my peers. Research is never research to me. Research to me is documenting experiences and stories and documenting what works well and what doesn't work. And so I view it as a very natural process from how I see things. So I'm particularly interested in women's homelessness, Aboriginal and Inuit women and how they experience homelessness. Very interested in mental health, the impact of colonization and trauma. I'm very interested in youth homelessness and the contributors to that. Very interested in kind of the gap around 16 to 19 where resources are not given to youth and the door that opens for predators to take advantage of youth. So I'm very interested in that. I'm really interested in rural and remote issues. That's just to name a few that are particularly interesting to me. I think it's important to look at northern issues related to homelessness because the North generally is left out of the national landscape when they're talking about homelessness. The other thing that happens in the North is there's no universities and they're very removed from researchers or the ability to have research done. So making sure that research on the North is done is really important because they have such a different environment politically and socially and even environmentally. They have a really different challenge that they face. Why else is it important? It's because, contrary to popular belief, one size doesn't fit all. The contributors to homelessness is a very individual thing from my perspective. So finding out what those contributors are and therefore finding out how to address those directly is really not all that easy, and it's not cookie cutter. And I think that proper research that's done with the engagement of the community will really reveal finally what those solutions. A couple of the key issues that I think are important is cultural relevancy or cultural specificity as it relates to delivering programs and services. I think it's really important that populations, particularly Aboriginal and Inuit populations, control their own resources and not have to be have a service delivered to them by a settler group, meaning a mainstream. I think the kind of final thing that's important to me is the tipping point where you're in a collaborative or you're forced to work in a partnership or in a collaborative, and then when that becomes being co-opted. How can you tell when you're in a collaboration and how can you tell when you're being co-opted? To desert at the end of the day the people that you're intending to serve. I think the development of policy is a really complex thing in some ways and not easy to answer in a quick way. Because a lot of problems occur when you change one policy without thinking of all the other policies. So I don't know all of the policy implications that my concerns raise up, but some of them would be making sure, for example, the policies would be around ensuring that Aboriginal and Inuit groups are properly funded to develop their own housing stock and to make sure they have their own shelters that they run, and to just sort of give that population the resources it needs to properly and effectively meet the needs of their population. So they don't need third-party people kind of administering their funds at all. So that would be one example of where something that's important to me is to have Inuit and Aboriginal organizations run their own programs. And so the policy implication would be to deal with the fact that that's largely done by non-Aboriginal groups right now. From my perspective, it would be Aboriginal and Inuit people who are homeless and their leadership, although not solely their leadership, because I think quite often leadership is removed from the reality sometime of what communities have to live with. The federal government, Indian and Northern Affairs, different departments in the federal government would have to be involved. I always think there's a strong role for human rights organizations to monitor that and to report back to international bodies, you know, for the Canadian government's failure to properly resource Aboriginal Inuit communities. So it's a small team. It's not that difficult actually to pull that team together. Quite often the political will isn't there for that. Right now we're looking at culturally specific programs that meet the needs of Aboriginal Inuit women who are traumatized as a result of colonization and long-standing violence. So we're focused on mental health issues and different therapeutic models to meet the needs of an Aboriginal Inuit population.
Mm-hmm.